What if I told you that the cassette is back in 2025 and has been back for a while? What if I told you that the cassette is the most important physical media format ever created? You would probably think I was crazy, and I would have said the same thing until I started digging into it and I started learning some very interesting things about the cassette tape. So you're gonna wanna watch this because this cassette story is bigger and weirder than you think. They were supposed to be dead, but yet here we are. Against all odds and basic logic, the cassette is making a comeback in 2025. And to be fair, it's actually been going on for a while. We're gonna break down what's really driving the comeback, whether cassettes are here to stay, and why history repeating itself is really important and actually really cool. So let's start off with a little bit of history that you probably didn't know about. And it makes sense because it's totally ironic. So, the cassette was born 1963 by Philips. I don't know who the father was. And here's the kicker, it wasn't even designed for music. It was designed for dictation, for corporate needs. And I find that oddly ironic because Bluetooth was never intended for music transmission, just data transmission. So what's the moral of that story? Well, I guess if it's designed for corporate efficiency or some type of manufacturing, we're gonna shove Van Halen into it and then make people listen to it. Over the next 8 years, Philips and Sony didn't give a crap about how bad it sounded, and Sony created the Walkman in 1979. And music is now personal, portable, fun, unless you're Sarah Connor's roommate. And in 1983, there was more cassettes sold than vinyl records. And that was a big turning point in the industry. 442 million albums sold on cassette. Boomboxes, car stereos, knockoff Sony Walkmans were everywhere. The best-selling cassette of all time? Wait for it. Whitney Houston's The Bodyguard soundtrack. That's so crazy. 17 million copies of that. By the early 80s, there were more cassette decks floating around than mullets, and there was a lot of mullets. So what's the takeaway? There were over 50 million devices that could play and record stuff to cassettes, and that laid the foundation for the largest grassroots organic music marketing machine the world has ever seen. And that all happened because some kid heard some band make some noise that he'd never heard before, and he wanted to share it with his buddy. And before the cassette, there was no media format that he could do that with. And now, for the first time ever, he could share it with his buddy. And that's where things got really interesting. Before cassettes, if you were gonna make it as a band, you had to get radio play, you had to get articles written about you in Rolling Stone. But with these little things, tape trading became a thing, which really broke down the gatekeeping of the music industry. Because now, the only thing you needed was a demo tape and a buddy with a dual cassette player. A whole big stack of stamps, some envelopes, and you could send those things across the country and the world. Tape trading was really a thing in metal and punk and the underground. Slayer, Death, Sepultura, all of their fan bases was built organically through tape trading. And in pure ironic bliss, Lars Ulrich discovered some of his favorite bands through tape trading. Metallica's No Life Till Leather was tape traded, and that's how they became big. Years later, Lars Ulrich would sue teenagers because they were trading digital downloads for free. It was the first music algorithm, and it was based on people's brains. So even though they sounded like garbage, it didn't matter. Something else very important happened during the tape trading days. Some kid, after dubbing 7 Anthrax bootlegs, shotgunning 7 Mountain Dews while watching a portion of Porky's, looked down and saw one of these laying on his floor. And he got an idea. And that idea accidentally started a cultural revolution. So what did that blank tape do laying on the floor? Did it start a political uprising? No. Did it create a new genre of music? No. It sparked something far more dangerous. The mixtape was the first step in countless awkward teenage mating rituals. Armed with nothing but bad timing and questionable taste. Teenagers collectively hit record and tried to win hearts with Peter Cetera, Peter Gabriel, and Pete Townsend sometimes when they were very confused. So even if you didn't win the heart of that girl after 12 mixtapes and that one restraining order, which was a new thing in the 80s, you still made mixtapes for other things. Tape culture, mixtape culture, was in the mainstream now. Hollywood was getting in on it. In 1989, it became absolutely iconic when Lloyd Dobler held a boombox above his head, blasting out some Peter Gabriel. And in 1985, Marty McFly terrorized his father after he went back in time with a mixtape called Van Halen and a Walkman to make his dad take his mom to a dance. Biff almost screwed it all up, but you can't fight the power of love. And speaking of Van Halen, this one company, little company, they shipped more copies of 5150 than Tower Records, Sam Goody, and Musicland combined. And simultaneously, they taught teenagers about reading the fine print when Pat Benatar and Richard Marx showed up at their house unannounced. If you are new here, please consider subscribing. If you've learned anything new, give this thing a thumbs up. Send it to a buddy. Thanks for watching. You know this company because they introduced you to Debbie Gibson, Def Leppard, and Debt Collection, which was not a band. It was apparently a binding legal contract that 14-year-olds probably should not be allowed to enter into when they're wearing hypercolor t-shirts. It was that little company that had your dad busting into your room, and instead of saying, "What's that noise?" he says, "What is a Belinda Carlisle and why did I get a bill for $19.99? He didn't know what a Belinda Carlisle was. Millions of kids got taken advantage of with these. They were like cheaper versions of regular tapes. Remember when we were talking about tape trading being the OG algorithm? Well, Columbia Music was the OG corporate music algorithm, just like Spotify, except it cost way more, you got way less music, and it involved stamps, a lot of stamps, and Corey Hart. Cassettes weren't perfect. They weren't even supposed to play music. But they were more than music. They signified rebellion, identity, 80s culture itself. However, the world was about to smash the fast forward button. And your half-melted Two Life Crew bootleg, not gonna survive the trip. Not only was the T1000 shiny, made from digital stuff, and was about ready to take over the world, but so was the CD. Cassettes were everywhere. On your nightstand, on your floor, in a briefcase-looking thing made from plastic that cracked after 3 uses. But in 1982, the compact disc made its debut. It didn't wear out, didn't need to be rewound, and it looked like a spaceship and sounded like the future, except some of the early ones were terrible. And then by the early 90s, CDs were everywhere, especially this one, Will Smith's Big Willie Style, very culturally important, significant CD. It's got Yes Yes Y'all on it, featuring Camp Lo. So tapes gave us kind of the first portable music experience. CDs gave us something that had never been seen before, the ability to skip tracks without it having to be a giant 8-track that looked like an Atari 2600 that you would put it in and you'd pull down some type of toggle switch and it would go now you just heard the spinning up sound of the CD. It was really cool because the tray came out super fast. Let's face it, cassettes were fragile. They melted, the tape came out all the time. Your crappy pile car stereo ate them on the regular. And while CDs would scratch, and trust me, I scratched a lot of them, they didn't degrade after you played them 40 times. So the CDs smashed the cassettes with convenience, looking super cool, and being much tougher. It was an easy decision. And this is where history starts to repeat itself, in somewhat of a bad/good way. Since a CD was a media format, and for some crazy reason there was no copyright protection on your CDs, kids could rip them and create mix CDs. And we've talked about them before. You have the MP3, you had Napster, you had LimeWire. Cassettes didn't stand a chance. It didn't take time anymore to steal music. You could do it while you're eating toast or watching Friends or Frasier. And then the iPod came out, which I don't have. You're walking around with 10,000 songs in your pocket. Maybe 10 with this to 10,000. amazing. Obviously, cassette sales went down and CD sales went down very quickly too. Mixtapes were an art. They took love, time, dexterity, but playlists were easier, faster, and it didn't require a trip to Walmart to make them. This was also the beginning of the death of the album, because now you could skip, now you can download, now you can make a playlist. There's a bunch of heavy hitters, not only cheap stuff, but really high-end cassette decks, which I find incredibly interesting. And we're gonna get into it later because I'm surprised this cassette thing even happened to begin with. In Nakamichi, Sony, Pioneer, Technics, Marantz, JVC, Onkyo, TIAC, Tascam. And the crazy thing is, watch this, I'm gonna go get it. This thing, my friends, is still sold new today. This is a TIAC. Not only is it a cassette player, but it's also a combination CD player. I think it comes in around $500. You can also get a new cassette deck, I believe from Marantz. Now the problem with these, they all use super cheap tape mechanisms. There's only a couple global manufacturers left. The Nakamichi Dragon was released in 1983, and it had a list price of $2,500. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $7,500 today. And a quick eBay search, I found one for $3,999. Here's what I found interesting. Vinyl as a format reigned supreme from the 50s to really the 1980s, about 25 years. CDs dominated from the 1990s to the early 2000s. That's 15 years of mainstream music dominance. The cassette, 1983 to 1990. That's only 7 years. And I find it very interesting that in that 7 years, it had such a huge impact on pop culture. If you think about it, everything in the 80s, all the 80s teen movies, had a character or a very important plot piece that was a cassette player. Maybe not every movie, but there are a lot. And even though cassettes outsold vinyl in 1983, I kind of think vinyl got the last laugh. The cassette was supposed to be dead, right? Well, somehow, some way, in an unlikely fashion, in 2010, sales started to climb. For the first time in decades, artists and labels started to release and re-release cassettes. This is a brand new re-release of Metallica and Justice for All. When the Black Album was remastered, I also bought the cassette. It's about $10. Sounds terrible. And sales climbed year over year because of a weird niche demand. Gen Z hipsters. But we'll get back to that later. And in 2022, cassettes peaked at 442,000 units shipped. That's less than 1% than they were at their heyday, but to be fair, CDs were kind of in the same boat. And this, to me, is the coolest part of why cassettes are making a comeback. Punk, indie bands, small DIY musicians are using the cassette to release their music. Just like all the way back in the 80s, because they're cheap, they're somewhat fast to duplicate, and most importantly, when you throw it on your table at a small show, it gives you, the band, street cred. A tiny run of vinyl can cost thousands, but you can make 20 cassettes for less than $100. And just like Gen Z hijacked mullets, they also hijacked something else that should have died long ago, and that's the cassette. Apparently they're searching for nostalgia that they never lived through, so I don't even know what that would be called, considering they never lived through it. We can have nostalgia. I don't know what they call it. I think this is a bit counterculture for the Gen Zers. You know, tiny houses, they're riding bikes around, not getting driver's license till they're like 20. It's more affordable than vinyl, but we're gonna talk about that later. But there's also the collectability aspect of it, and I think that's what's really behind it outside of the DIY bands. And once again, the movie industry is getting in on it. Guardians of the Galaxy, the Walkman was basically a character in the movie, and they released all 3 of their soundtracks on cassette. Billie Eilish, The Weeknd, Metallica, Lady Gaga, all releasing cassettes with their new album drops. And not in an ironic fashion. You got non-niche retailers selling cassettes again, including Target, Tower Records, which is basically just an online store now, Urban Outfitters, and go check out Tapehead City. It's pretty cool. But there's a hardware problem. You have small niche companies like FIO releasing tape players, so this can't record. Only a couple manufacturers making tape mechanisms, and they're all super cheap. Maybe if there's a real rise in cassette sales, someone will step up and make a decent tape deck, but I don't see it happening. To give this some context, in 2022, vinyl records sold 41.3 million copies, compact discs sold 33.4 million copies, and cassettes 430,000. Nothing to sneeze at, but it's nothing compared to CDs and vinyl. The other major problem with a legitimate cassette comeback is nostalgia. For someone my age, it's fun to buy a cassette, but from my perspective, I want nostalgia and I want fidelity. Like this excellent copy of Big Willie Style from Will Smith includes classics like Men in Black and Getting Jiggy With It. Vinyl also sounds really good. It's more complicated and probably more expensive to get great sound out of vinyl. However, nostalgia box checked and fidelity box checked. And this looks way better on your wall than this looks. When I listened to the re-release of Metallica Black on the FIO, I could legitimately hear the other side, B-side, when I was listening to the A-side. It sounded terrible. I wanted to like it, but I couldn't. Audiophiles tolerate quirks, but they do not tolerate mediocrity. And there's another unlikely format that's still hanging around, and that's the SACD. MoFi continues to release things on SACD, and I heard the reason behind that is because a lot of these big record companies won't allow a re-release of vinyl or CD, but they're like, yeah, SACD? Sure. There is also a hardware problem with SACD, bit of a way around it. If you want me to make a full video about SACD, please put it in the comments. Also, crazy price gouging at places like Half Price Books. I went in there and they had Nirvana, AC/DC, Metallica, and those things were going for anywhere between $50 to $100, which is crazy because we used to fill up 5-gallon buckets of them and throw them away into a dumpster. And go to eBay and check out new old stock. I wonder what a new unopened copy of Will Smith's Big Willie Style. And to me, those crazy prices are purely driven by the collector market. I'm gonna be buying a Japanese pressing of one of my favorite records before I would ever pay $100 for a cassette. People chase rare vintage records too, but here's the difference. They actually sound good. So is this a real comeback? I don't think so. This is more about novelty and the collector culture than anything else. It's a fashion statement for Gen Z. It's hipster cool to have a bunch of cassettes on your shelf, but I think that's cool because music should be fun. However, unless labels start to invest in high quality tape stock, unless we have manufacturers making better machines, this will remain a cute fad and something cool to put on your shelf. Now, I could be wrong. I never thought that instant cameras like Polaroids or the Fuji Instax would make a comeback, but my kids love those things. And with companies like FIO making products now, they could easily put Bluetooth in here, and the kids could play cassettes or listen to their phone through it. But I don't think cassettes are ever going to be back into the audiophile world. Vinyl offers nostalgia and a jaw-dropping sound, and CDs offer nostalgia and sound way better than streaming. Tapes provide hiss and a sneak peek at side B. I was at Target yesterday and I saw something I'd never seen before. They have a little area for vinyl and CDs, but they also have these things that look like a box of stationery. And I picked one up because I have no idea what it is. It's a special box set for CDs, and I think it's like K-pop. It was a bunch of artists that I'd never heard of before, but inside that box was a little booklet about the CD, little piece of art, and the CD itself. And trust me, this was not REO Speedwagon. This was not for me. It's for the younger kids, and I find that very encouraging. I don't care how people listen to their music. I just want them to enjoy music, whether it's on a cassette, mini disc, which actually would be pretty cool. I would totally buy a mini disc player if somebody came out with one. But let's not kid ourselves. No one's gonna make a Nakamichi Dragon again, and labels aren't going to invest in high fidelity tape. So, this cassette comeback may already be rewinding. I hope I didn't smash your cassette renaissance hopes. And I still buy cassettes, but they are legitimately just for me to put on my shelf and to look at. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you got anything out of it, if you learned anything new, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and maybe send this to a buddy.